Hi, I'm Ems, aka on Deck and Wings. In this video, I'll be taking a look at and reviewing Monument Hobbies Pro-acrylic paints, specifically the base set. This set comes with 24 paints. This set in particular retails for around about £80. If you wanted to buy the individual paints, they retail for around £3.80 to £4.50. It just depends on where you get them from, and the signature series such as the Ninja one are usually on the more expensive spectrum. These are pretty sizey bottles as you get 22ml of paint, compared to Citadel where you only get 12, and most other ones where you only get 17ml. One of the first things I really like about the bottles is the design of the lid and the tubing where the paint comes out of. It's a twist cap. This is to make the paint less likely from crusting up inside like you get with most dropper bottles. You can also control the amount which comes out a bit better. You will need to remove the film underneath it first before you start painting, of course. Just as a bit of trivia as well, the bottle design reminds me of the art supplies you get from Winsor & Newton. They have a twist cap like this. So I tried out each paint on a swatch of paper first, and they pretty much had similar consistencies. One thing I do like about these paints is they have ordinary names, so it's easier to navigate what they are instead of having those silly fantasy ones. So after all that waffle aside, let's actually get down to painting. I'm trying the paints out on this generic space warrior with an alien. Yeah, it's not a well-known IP at all. I'm kicking things off with the dark grey blue, which kind of reminds me of Ultramarines blue. So straight out of the pot, this paint is quite thick, but you can move it around a lot. It has some viscosity to it. I primed the model black as I wanted to really see how opaque these paints are, because white can be a bit more forgiving. I've just added a dash of water. The paints are really smooth, they're not chalky, and even though the paint's opaque, it still has some viscosity to it. It flows really well. That's the problem with a lot of highly pigmented paints, is that they tend to be too thick, so you have to thin them out quite a lot, which can be a bit of a pain to get the right consistency. Granted, a lot of Citadel paints can cover very well. However, I think the Pro-acryl ones flow better and feel smoother, they're not chalky. So this is the model after one coat of that blue. After that, I'm grabbing a lighter blue, so this faded ultramarine. This reminds me of Citadel's Caligar blue. Again, with the naming of these, I think it's really straightforward and makes it easier to know what colour to use next for highlighting. There's quite a few of the paints where it will have a name such as umber and then another colour called light umber, so you know which one to add afterwards for highlights. You obviously don't have to paint this way, but I think it's a really cool transition for people to move away from Citadel and try other paints as well. Because that's how Citadel markets its paints and how a lot of people start off painting. The true test of these paints is to try out the yellow, and yellow is just notoriously a difficult colour to work with, especially bright cold yellows like these. Yellow pigments are just naturally transparent anyway. But I do think this paint covers well even over a black primer, but I wouldn't normally recommend painting yellow over a black primed area unless that's the desired effect. It still looks darn good though, even over black, and I think after a couple more coats it would cover it. One of the most popular, if not the most popular colours from this range is the Bull Titanium White. The thing with white is, like yellow, it's a very transparent colour, and it is just naturally chalky. But that's not to say some paint brands haven't worked around this and put different additives into it to make it smoother, and this one's no exception. I think this goes on beautifully even over a black primed area. But like I said again with the yellow, I wouldn't recommend painting white over a black primed area. It just shows you how opaque these paints are. But if you're someone who's painting these up for an army or what have you, if you put a couple coats of this down, it looks pretty good. Even though the black is still showing through a little bit, it's covered super well. Whilst on the topic of white paint, I wanted to point out in this set are these really cool off-white colours. Something I picked up over the years is not to add pure white to highlight things. It's better to add a little bit of another colour or an off-white colour. And the same with painting white. If you want an area to be white, like a loincloth or whatever, it's better to do an off-white colour first. So on the right is the pure titanium white, and these other colours are here, and they're really cool because you could use these colours instead of white if you wanted to make some more interesting contrasts. Definitely shows off the more arty side of the Pro-acryl paints. I decided to test the Pro-acryl against some Scale Artist colours. These are an offshoot of Scale 75 and they're very highly pigmented. The downside to highly pigmented paints such as these in Chimera is that they're very thick. The Pro-acryl paints aren't as thick. They're thicker than some other brands. Paints like Scale Colours are designs where they're highly pigmented and they also allow you to really work into these paints so you can keep thinning them down and add different glazes and blend them. The Pro-acrylic paints are pretty good just straight out of the bottle, so they're versatile really. Don't have to waste as much time thinning them out. However, the Scale Colours, in my opinion, are still going to be a lot better if you're painting something a lot more artily and a lot more for display level painting, especially busts and larger models. And to be honest, these two colours are very similar when I put them on a model. Keep in mind though, this is just like one lot of paint comparisons and some of the other paints might be different. It's interesting though how Pro-acrylic are kind of bridging in this gap between these high-end paints and these more budget, user-friendly ones. Because you use the Pro-acryl straight out of the bottle with a bit of water, but there's also the option to stretch them out more if you wanted to get into more technical painting. Next up, I wanted to compare these with Vallejo paints. Vallejo are probably one of the most popular and well-regarded paints out there for miniatures. The Vallejo is on the left and the Pro-acryl is on the right. The Vallejo paint is thinner. I'm also finding that the Pro-acryl paints bind back together quicker when they're thinned out, so they go back into the blob easier. This personally might need some getting used to, but it might be okay for you. Normally when I add water to paint, it doesn't really react exactly in this way, but I don't think it'll be too much of a bother, hopefully. In conclusion, I'm really impressed by these paints. I really like the coverage of them and the consistency. They have some body to them, they're a little bit thicker, but that's not a hindrance. They flow super well. The bottle design's great and the fact that they're larger. The naming system is straightforward. However, I wouldn't be throwing out any of my other paints. I honestly still think Vallejo is one of the best entry points or transitions from Citadel. They're still a lot cheaper and they're more widely available. They might not be as opaque as the majority of the Pro-acryl paints, but they're still very good for what they are. And I still honestly think Scale 75 and the Scale Colour range are some of the best paints out there, which I love to use. Scale 75 and all the different offshoots have some really interesting colours and some really cool ones for like nuances and if you want to get into really arty painting. And thicker paint isn't always a problem if you know how to use it, but that can be a problem for quite a few painters, especially newer ones, or if you're just used to army painting type of styles. Which is why I think Pro-acryls shine really well, because they bridge this gap between you getting into basic paints like Vallejo and more artsy paints like Scale 75. Because the Pro-acryl isn't as thick, it still has more body to it. You can use it for basic army painting if you want to, but you can also get artier with it. I think it's worth getting a couple of these to try out. Personally, like I said, I won't be replacing all of my paints with these, but I think I'll be using them quite a lot. I would like to in the future to do a more extensive video on different paint brands and the pros and cons in my opinion. Thank you for watching. As always, remember to enjoy your hobbies for yourself, respect the people who enjoy them in their own ways, and at the end of the day, they're just raw dollies. I'll see you in the next one.